Howdy y'all, I'm Steve with Elevate, and today I am super excited about this super amazing Elevated 8. We get to talk with the OG glassblower, Bandhu Dunham. He literally has created the Bibles for us to use in this borosilicate world. So man, this is gonna be super, super cool. I wanna throw something out there. We need some help. We're looking for some Elevate dolls to help spread the word of Elevate. If you're into this stuff, hit us up. Anyways, let's roll into the super amazing, super lucky Elevated 8 tonight with Bandhu Dunham. All right, y'all. So here we got the amazing Bandhu Dunham. Super excited and welcome, Bandhu.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question is, how did you get started? You're to me, you're the grandfather. To me, your books are called the Bible of Glass. And so the question is, how did you get started into this art form?
Yeah, I started into it before it was hip, really,
Yeah.
1975, I was a nerdy kid in high school, and I always had a chemistry lab in my parents' basement since, this was back in like New Jersey and Connecticut, since the time I was like 10 or younger. And back then you could get these really cool chemistry sets that had a lot of great chemicals in them, which of course always ended up going down the sink. And I probably put all kinds of toxic stuff in my parents' septic system as a kid. But so I was a nerdy kid into chemistry. I had this lab in my basement. I really wanted to be a mad scientist. So I thought if I learned to make glass, apparatus like Dr. Frankenstein had, then I could be a mad scientist. And those chemistry sets, they'd have a manual in them, and they'd always have a little bit about like how to bend a glass tube, how to make a little animal out of glass, real simple stuff that you could do with an alcohol lamp and a piece of soft glass that they would give you. Gave you like one 8-inch piece, maybe two, of soft glass that you're supposed to play with. So I learned a little bit and just enough, played with it enough to get bit by the bug from that. And then I went to our, sort of naively just went to our county library in New Jersey, Morris County Library, and they had some books on glassblowing. They had John Burton's book from 1968, 67, and Hamas Farm and Stong's book from 1968. And those two, they told you how to get started. And they had, very basic equipment, some of which was really out of date. And in fact, one of them had like how to make your own kiln out of transite, which is asbestos board. And me and my dad were like cutting asbestos board in the basement of our house with a skill saw. We probably breathed in a bunch of asbestos, but I'm okay. And he's no longer with us anyway, but I don't think it was the asbestos that did him in. So I made a lot of equipment myself, and because you couldn't buy a lot then, or it was harder to get.
You couldn't just go on the internet, you're saying?
No, there was no internet back then. Back then, if you wanted to see a TV show that you liked, like a rerun that you liked of Star Trek or something, you'd have to wait a year for it to come around again.
Yeah.
And hope you were watching TV the right night. Anyway, so I just started experimenting, playing around with the stuff I found from the books. There weren't color companies. Burton's book had a couple of color formulas you could play with. Maybe they worked, maybe they didn't. I would get information on colors from like some furnace glass blowers. If I went to a craft fair, I was selling my little glass animals and stuff like that. And then there'd be some other glass blower there. I'd ask him, how do you make yellow? He'd go, silver nitrate. Like, really? I've got some silver nitrate left from my chemistry lab. And I mix some silver nitrate in there and get black spots all over my hands from the silver, nitrate vaporizing off. So yeah, I was like 15, 16 years old, just experimenting, having fun. I did actually, make a couple pipes back then, just out of soda lime glass. I was lucky they didn't crack. I think.
Did you smoke back then?
Yeah, I was in high school.
Okay.
In the 70s, mid 70s. I mean, what else are you gonna do? I'm not a big smoker. I've made pipes and I've used some pipes and appreciate pipes and the whole culture. But most of my altered states of consciousness come from meditation these days. So anyway, I just experimented, and eventually the glass became more interesting than the chemistry. And I eventually actually dropped out of college to pursue the glass full time as a artist craftsman, and
And what were you going to college to pursue? Something in chemistry or?
yeah, chemical engineering, because that was
Okay.
what the guidance counselor said would be a good job prospect, and probably I would have made more money as a chemical engineer, but maybe wouldn't have had as much fun, right? So. Yeah. So, and when I was studying chemical engineering, the basement of the chemistry department, they had a glass blower, and he let me set up in a corner of his shop, and I actually learned a lot from him. I was using soft glass up to that point, soda lime glass.
Yeah.
And then he introduced me to borosilicate, and I could see what kind of torches to get and how to do things. So that was really great. That was old Harry Olson. At Princeton. And,
so Harry Olson, he opened up your vision to what borosilicate was.
Yeah, and he was doing, he was strictly doing scientific apparatus, but he helped me figure out how to do some things I wanted to do. I was making, to sell when I was in college, I was making like little glass animals and stuff like that. I wasn't really doing pipes at that point very much. So.
Right. Wow. That's a crazy story. And
yeah, it seems like a long time ago.
Yeah, and it is, but it's really not that long ago. It's just, our lives are so fast and so quick. And
yeah, the field has really exploded. I'm just so impressed by what people have done. My books have helped with some of that, but really it's people's own inspiration and ingenuity and the drive of, the pipe makers, but also bead makers. We're just passionate about wanting to explore it, and other people doing, sculptural things with lampwork glass. So it's really a very fruitful time to be alive.
It really is, and the palette of color now for boro is just it's like growing exponentially.
Yeah.
I
like to say when I was starting out, we didn't have color companies. I'd have to make my own color, mix it from dead bugs and used Q-tips.
Right. And
there's an old video of Sue Ellen Fowler from some like PBS TV show. And she's melting down broken bromo-seltzer bottles to get blue glass, that was I guess, compatible with what we should do.
But that's what you had to do back then. Like, it just, and it's crazy because art's been around for so long, or not just art, but glass has been around for so long that it's crazy. It took so long for the color palettes of both soft glass and boro to be developed, I think.
Yeah, well, in soft glass, they've had a lot of colors for a while. Like in lampworking, you had a Fettri, already a Fettri was available. But the borosilicate, because the borosilicate melts at a higher temperature, a lot of the nice colors, the chemicals that are used to make the nice colors, are not stable. And, like with the cadmium colors, actually, when I was first starting out, I got some of my glass and some of my tools, so scraps of graphite. There's even some I'm still using, some graphite that I carved from this place called Vitrodynamics in Rockaway, New Jersey. I think maybe they may even still exist. But they were experimenting with making some colored borosilicate back then, and it was really what it was cadmium colors for the most part, but they were weird, like almost more like ceramic cadmium compounds that were like packed. I guess they would take a big glass tube and pack these mixtures in there and then pull them out. So they were it was sheathed with clear glass to kind of protect it from the extreme heat. And then you had to be very careful working it. It boiled really easily, even though it had that sort of clear protection, or it was not very compatible. So the colors that didn't boil a lot were not very compatible. So it was pretty primitive, but it was an attempt. And they were around for a few years. I may even have a couple inches of some of that stuff that I've kept as nostalgic samples. But like the cadmium colors are an example, especially of back then, they just hadn't figured out how to make cadmium colors effectively. And it took having a big market. I mean, I was bugging the people at Corning for years. Well, you guys make some colored glass, we want it. And they were like, they didn't say it to me, but the reason they didn't was because there wasn't a market for it. Because you have to invest a bunch of time and money, as any of the color companies will tell you, to figure out how to get some of these colors to work. It's good to have someone who's got a degree in glass engineering, glass chemistry. And then to figure out how to stabilize the cadmium colors like they've done now. the cadmium colors are way better than what they
Way
first were,
better.
as you well know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a matter of having the market and people being willing to invest the time and energy to make these things happen. And then glass is such an incredible material. Pretty much anything is possible, if you
Yeah.
invest time and money to make it happen.
Right. Yeah. It's I don't know. It's just such a neat material. It's
Yeah.
I don't even know how to describe it. It's just
Magic.
it's I think that's it. It's
why we all get the
magic.
bug, and we can't quit, whether we're making money or not. We just keep doing it. People don't understand. They just don't understand us.
No, and somebody was telling me that they have the different states out there. You have your solid, liquid, gas, and molten glass. They think is actually a fourth state. I don't know. I just heard it, so I could be bullshitting right now. I don't know, but it's just weird.
I've always heard the fourth state is like plasma. Like the burning, the sun, it's superheated gases, all sort of broken apart into all their different ions, as like the fourth state. Glass is really, I don't know if it's a fourth state, but it's technically, a liquid. The way the structure is, it's kind of a liquid that's very stiff, but not frozen.
Yeah.
Which is why a lot of the properties of glass, like the melting point, people talk about glass having a melting point. But really what happens is there's a certain temperature and the glass starts getting softer gradually. It's not like ice, you melt it and it's liquid. Glass gradually. And so they define the melting point of glass is when the viscosity or the stiffness of the glass reaches a certain number that they measure with, viscometers and stuff. But that's what they call the melting point. Same thing with annealing. That's why you can anneal things. If you've got your annealing temperature, maybe you're annealing things at 1050, but you can anneal things at 1030 a little bit if you let it sit a little bit longer.
A longer soak.
It will relax the strains in the glass, but it just takes longer. Like the annealing temperature is defined as, I believe, the temperature at which the stresses, the strains within the glass will naturally relax below a certain threshold, some low threshold within 15 minutes. And that's what we call that annealing temperature.
Yeah, I always think of it, that's when everybody's dancing in the same groove and everybody's having a good time.
Everybody relaxes.
Yeah.
You're on the dance floor and the molecules can kind of move in between each other without colliding and being stressed out. Yeah.
This is crazy.
Got a gun in their pocket.
Right. So what was the first item you kind of started blowing on your own? Was it pretty much just like little sculptures then, I guess? Figurines?
Yeah. I was making little glass animals. I found a local gift shop near me and I was making little glass animals to sell to them. Probably, let's see, the first, I don't know, the first actual thing I made might have been a bead. Because I had this old chemistry book, the Boys' Book of Experiments from like 1935 that had all these very dangerous things there, like how to make gunpowder and nitrocellulose and things.
And this is for boys?
Yeah, for kids, right? And you couldn't publish a book like that these days. But it had a thing in there about making, it had you make beads by taking break up a jar and heat the glass over a little gas burner. And they told you how to make a little gas torch. Take a pipe and drill a hole in it and then, put the gas line in your house, which probably just had a stopcock for a rubber hose back in those days, right? And heat the gas up and light it. And take a broken jar and melt it and take the glass and take some copper. They said to take copper wire and get the glass hot and wrap it around the copper wire, which, now with borosilicate, the copper would just completely melt, right? But you were using a very low temperature flame. Wrap the glass around this copper wire and then when it's done, snip the bead off, leave the wire in there and put it in a jar full of hydrochloric acid and dissolve out the copper. And, I thought, I was like, maybe 14 or 15 at the time. I was like, oh, that sounds great, acid. And you could go to the hardware store, you get muriatic acid. You can still do that. It's like for pool cleaning. But back then, oh my God, this stuff. I could go to the drugstore and I'd walk in, if you've ever made gunpowder, disclaimer, I'm not recommending that anyone make gunpowder, but the basic, you're on your own, okay? But the basic ingredients of gunpowder, which you would have learned from watching Star Trek, because Captain Kirk had to make gunpowder once, right? On some alien planet, is charcoal, carbon, charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter. And I would go to the local drugstore and get a little container, like a pound of saltpeter and a pound of sulfur. And no one thought a thing of it. Nowadays you'd have to fill out some terror watch list or something.
Right.
Do that. But those were more innocent times back then. And I'd take those home and make gunpowder and whatever.
And trying to make a bead out of something.
Yeah, I didn't really make any dangerous explosives, but it made you feel very powerful to think you could make gunpowder, right?
No doubt. Do you have any specific items that you cherish during your career?
Oh, there were some old pieces early pieces I'd given to my mom. She passed away about a year and a half ago. But they were in her collection for a long time. I always would say that she had the largest collection of my work of anyone. And so I've got a couple of those pieces now, first little vases I did and things, mixing color, whatever color I could. So those are precious to me. And then I have a collection, I've got a pretty good collection of different people's work in my bathroom at the studio.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of pieces that people have given me or that I've traded for over the years. So there's some pretty cool things in there. I don't have them all labeled. I should. Some of them I've forgotten. Oops, who was it who gave me that?
Yeah.
Beat, when they were first starting out. But I've got one of Shelbo's first goblin heads. I don't know if it's the first, but it's one of the first. It's before he was even using color.
Wow.
It's a little goblet head and he made a base for it. It was a goblet foot. There's his head on there, and it doesn't even look really like the goblins he's doing now. He's really evolved them and developed them, and he's using a lot of color now. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of a cool piece. So he came and did an internship with me when he was, years ago when he was starting out, or just a little bit into it. And so I've got that goblin head. I've got pieces that I've traded with Mickelson and Shane Farrow and Sally Prosh and Matt S. Cookie, a lot of different people. So that's really cool.
That is neat, man. That's really neat. All those
that's
different
one of the things
pieces.
You just from sticking with it, sticking with the field and being in it for a long time. Things collect over time.
Right. And then those trades, I'm sure every piece that somebody has from you is as well as cherished, as much.
So.
Yeah, that's neat. So when you started, you mentioned that you were working with a guy out of Princeton. Did you have a mentor? Because it just, I would have to say you didn't have it.
No, Harry taught me more than anyone else. And I had already been doing it a couple of years at that point. I got books. And, back then there was what we refer to as the glass curtain. Lampworking in the States was kind of a passed down within families, from until the 60s or 70s, really. If you wanted to learn to be a glassblower, lamp worker, you either had to be married into a family, or born into a family, or like Shane Farrow, he apprenticed with some people. But it was like being adopted into the family, and it was considered sort of secretive. There wasn't, there certainly wasn't the level of creativity that we have now. So people would be, like carnival glass blowers or guys in the shopping malls. They'd have a few designs that had worked well for them, and they were sort of nervous about anybody copying their designs.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess they didn't have the confidence of, a lot of design skills. And so, it's kind of like, you see that in the pipe world too. Someone comes up with a good idea and someone else, kind of bites on that design, and then you argue about who came up with it first. And, it can get, the best way to deal with it is just to be creative and come up with something new all the time if you can.
Yeah, not everybody is that creative though, so they can only build on other people.
Yeah, and there's certainly a place for just people to be a craftsman, just to do a good job making functional, production pieces. And that's because there's a place for those. People need them. And it's great. I mean, it's much nicer to have a nicely made production piece than just some cheap thing that was cranked out in a factory somewhere by slaves.
Right.
So I definitely feel like it's appropriate that there's different levels that people operate at, and different business models that people operate at. So, or, someone can be making simple, practical, functional pipes, production pieces. That's how they make their living. And then they do other stuff that is their fun, inspired, crazy glass things that maybe nobody else in the world wants to buy, but they love making it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool too. But anyway, back then, in like up into the 70s, there was the glass curtain where people wouldn't share information. So I got these books, and that was pretty much what I could get. There weren't a lot of people around who would teach you.
And I think that's where you really opened up the door for people like me and a lot of people in that time from the 70s to YouTube, when, I went around like this one place, I need help with this. And they were making like little trinkets and shit. And they're like, we don't blow glass. I go to a quartz place and they're like, well, that's made for crack. And I'm like, and so same thing. Nobody really wanted to teach it because glass is easy, but it's also really hard. And, everybody wants to hold on to their special little skills because we're special, but I guess not that special. And growing on each other really allows us to be more special, I think, because there's competition there.
Clearly. I mean, we see that. We've seen that, this explosion. And I was glad to have my books come out at the right time. I had been sitting on the idea of a book for a while, because partly because I'd just been taking a lot of notes whenever I would go somewhere. Like if I was taking a class at Pilchuck or something, I would devour their library and the maybe 5 books they had that had lampworking in them. And I had this little notebook, and I thought, this information ought to be one book.
How long did it take you? Once you decided, hey, I'm going to make a book, how long did it take you to actually create that book?
Well, there's a period where I kind of chickened out, where I'd started writing it, and then I was thinking, oh my God, to make this actually happen, I either have to pay an illustrator a lot of money to make really clear illustrations drawn by hand, or I've got to learn to make really good illustrations myself. And that was daunting for a while. And then at some point I decided, what I can do will be good enough to get things started. So I came out with so there was a period of maybe even 7 years where I was like, I had this rough manuscript, kind of the outline, like you see in the books, the basic, introduction, history, how to set up a studio, basic techniques. I had that outline. And then I did what I called a pre-publication edition, which I showed around to some people, some of whom actually tried to discourage me, thinking, you can't do this. You got to leave this to the experts. It's like,
so do you think their discouragement actually gave you more encouragement to prove them wrong?
Eventually, yeah. It was like, and then it becomes a point of not me proving them wrong, but everybody else proving them wrong. When we see what's just happened with this field, it's exploded. Mm-hmm. And it's great what's available for people to do.
That's cool, man. So what classes, if any, have you taken, and do you feel that they helped push your skill set?
Oh yeah, initially the classes I could take were in furnace glass blowing. So when I was living in New Jersey, I took classes at Urban Glass in Brooklyn. Well, actually, Urban Glass, which was at that point still called the New York Experimental Glass Workshop. They were in the Village, as I recall. And I took some classes there. And then when I moved out to Arizona, I took some classes up at Pilchuck. And so I drove up there, like kind of part of a big road trip I would do a couple times. So I took classes with a couple classes with Dan Daly, took a class with Jenny Ruffner, her teaching assistant. The first lampworking class they had at Pilchuck, I was in that that was taught by Josef and Pavel Molnar. There were a couple of Czech glass blowers, one of whom actually was living Canada. So that was like 1983.
Wow.
And then, took a class with Brian Kirkfleet, actually. I mean, I knew Brian before that because we were both in the Pilchuck class, but he was teaching at Penland, the first or one of the first real lamp working classes they had there, an early one anyway. And so I was his teaching assistant, and that was really helpful to learn like what people want to learn in a class. What do people have the most trouble with when they're trying it out?
Right.
But yeah, my education was informed a lot by, places like Urban Glass and Pilchuck. So really influenced by the contemporary art world and the sense at that point of the studio glass movement breaking its way into the art world, the bigger art market where people really value stuff and support artists making a good living with glass. And it was kind of like the studio glass movement was busy getting itself established, getting people to recognize them and take them seriously. Mm-hmm. And lamp working was kind of like, as Jenny Ruffner put it, we were the red-haired cousin. We were like, it was almost like some people regarded lamp work as like, well, you guys are even a lower level than us as far as recognition by the art world, and we don't want to be dragged down by you guys doing little wishing wells and spun glass ships and things, because that's what people thought was possible.
Right.
So it was kind of like a struggle within a struggle to get lamp working recognized. But eventually it was, people caught on. And now it's treated with respect at all those places,
I'd like to wonder, like, you got bit through the chemistry and through the glass. At some point along the way, you could have easily just flowed into soft glass. Why do you think that didn't happen?
Well, one reason, it was harder to set up a studio. It was a lot more expensive to set up a furnace for glass blowing. I mean, our local community college here in Arizona had one for a while, had a program for a while. But it's a bigger commitment. I mean, you can't just set that up people do now, but it's not easy to just set that up in your garage, right? Whereas lamp working, you can set it up pretty easily.
Right.
You want to make sure you do it safe, make sure you have the ventilation, all that good stuff. But it's not too hard. So that practical aspect of it made it a bit easier.
Awesome.
Even though there weren't as many colors.
Yeah. And then so you were just making little figurines and with a little bit of your color, but just powering through. I can't even imagine, because there was not the world around like it is now.
Yeah. I mean, some artist said, the difficult things are always the easiest to do because no one else is doing them. It's like you get to be the first, right? I look at early pieces of mine that, like, at the time people thought, oh, that's really interesting, that you're doing that. And I look at them now, it's like, well, those are pretty primitive. Same thing is true with the bigger studio glass movement. You look at the early stuff from like the famous Toledo workshop in the 60s, and it's pretty primitive little blobby stuff, but it was very cutting edge at the time, like, because no one was doing it.
Right.
And so kind of plot your own way. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what your own way is. I think Bill Watterson, the cartoonist who does Calvin and Hobbes.
Yep.
He said you usually in life don't know what your destination is until you get there. So I think it's the same thing with art. You kind of do what interests you, and if no one else thinks it's interesting, that might actually be a good sign that you're doing something that needs to be developed.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And then along the way you have to figure out what really is great or what's worth pursuing. Because in glass in particular, it's such a pretty material. It's so magical and seductive that it's real easy to make something a little blob and think, this is the greatest thing.
I've done that.
We all start out that way, right? And then you give it to your mom and she's like, oh, darling, it's so nice, But you have to get past the point of making stuff that only your mom would like. Right. And that can be more of a challenge.
Yeah.
Takes some study and, self-study really, and personal development to expand what it is you're capable of doing, pursue your interests and grow them into interesting interests.
Yeah, I think that's the whole life lesson, you know, like we tell people, oh, you need to go to college and you need to figure this out. But man, it's like, how does anybody really know what they want to do until they start to experience things? And
yeah,
so just open doors, I guess, and
yeah,
walk through.
I think everybody needs to make themselves a lifelong learner. It's not like you go to college and then you're done learning, right? Or if that's your attitude, you're not going to have such an interesting life. I think we all need to be learning all the time.
Yep. Breaking down new stuff and keep failing at stuff, you know, because it's not failure. It's just finding new stuff that you haven't done. And so, yeah.
If you never fail, you're not trying hard enough.
Right. Absolutely. Do you have a preferred style or technique that you really like to use a lot? I know I see a lot of your stuff is like sculptural and welding, and I don't know anybody else who does kinetic glass stuff like you.
Yeah, kinetic. I mean, there's a few people playing with it, but you know, some of those are people that I taught. But kinetic glass there's always been a little bit of it around, tiny bit of it, but I really wanted to pursue it, so that's what I'm working on. I'm working on a big commissioned marble machine for somebody right now, for a collector in Texas. It's going to be like 30 inches tall by 26 by about 11 inches. This big thing. I have to make it in 2 parts so it'll fit in my kiln.
Wow.
But yeah, you know, I'm interested in you know, I got this compliment once. I was at one of the pipe shows. I think it was Age maybe. And this guy comes by. He was Dutch. He was there buying for some head shop in Amsterdam or something. But he looked at my stuff and he said, because my stuff is just weird. I mean, you know, I've sold a few pipes, but I don't have a real big place in the pipe market because I guess my stuff's too weird even for the pipe scene, which is saying a lot, right? But he looked at my stuff and he said, I see the work of a master who wants to show everything that is possible in glass. And that's kind of how I feel about it. Like, I want to explore the edges of what's possible in glass. So kinetic glass is definitely that. And then I'm also very interested in glass that has, you know, texture. I sometimes like glass that's real pure, simple, clean lines. You know, I've done some goblets and things like that, and those are really great. But I also like glass that's really kind of funky with some texture to it. Like my virtual background here, that's one of my, let's get my finger in the right place. That's one of my pieces, you know, I darkened it up so it wouldn't be too distracting. But, you know, I like glass that has texture to it, the thick and thin and that organic but geometric property at the same time. So that really interests me, that sort of borderline between geometry and biology, you know, organic forms, and maybe that are showing, rather than being perfectly straight, smooth glass, having some texture to them, like some depth, and maybe something that looks like they've aged or been scarred or wounded. And they have a mysterious kind of life to them. There's one other. Let me show you another. Since we've got Zoom here, where is it? Video settings. Another one of my backgrounds, if I can find it here. This effect here, I've used this on some of my pieces. It's you know, gold and silver fuming on powder, and then trailing clear over it. I don't know if you can see it really in this picture, but there's places where it gets a lot of depth to it with the fuming, and then multiple layers overlapping. So I really like. It's kind of like you know, raku ceramics and other kinds of glazes, where you get this organic quality, where it's you know, the color is variation, you know, very variegated. I really like that kind of texture and iridescence. So those effects really appeal to me. And glass that's kind of crusty sometimes and funky. Part of that comes from the fact that I hate to throw away colored glass. Even cheap Chinese colored glass, little scraps that I might have around. It's like, I just hate to throw it away because I remember having to mix it by hand. And if you wanted to get a 16-inch rod, 7 millimeters in diameter, that was like, you know, of like striking red or something. that was an all-day project. So, when I pull something off with tweezers, there's a little bit of some colors. Oh, I hate to throw it out. So sometimes I'll just save up scraps of color and mix them together, take a bunch of them and mix them together into a new color. And, sometimes you have to throw a little bit of borax in there as a flux, so it all smooths out. But I make some really interesting, unique colors that way. And also it gives a nice kind of texture to it, those weird colors that I add. So.
Yeah, one thing I heard you mention, this particular background is the gold and the silver. You mentioned powders. So yeah. I guess that to me is 100% new. I'm familiar.
Well, so what I've done here, so the gold isn't a powder. What I did is, so this starts off as a tube, and I guess this might be a place where we'll input a picture of a piece that uses some of this.
Yeah.
This is a close up. What I do is it's a tube, fume it with some silver, roll it in some like light cobalt powder, like cobalt, frit powder.
Okay.
Then fume it with some gold maybe on top of that. And that gives you the little bit of a crusty texture because the fume on top of the powder. And then when you trail the clear glass on top of that, it traps. Like here, up there, I don't know. Do you see my pointer, the little hand?
No,
I guess
I can't
it's on my
see
screen,
that.
but it's not you. Let's see. So you figure out which hand. Everything is mirrored, right? So
yeah.
Here, there, and like there.
Yeah, the greenish area.
Backwards. It's like cutting your hair in a mirror. That texture is the fume on top of powder with clear on top of it, traps that, sort of freezes that texture. So even when you blow it out, you get that crinkly, powdery, iridescent gold look. And then, the gold fuming. So you get, and then I repeat that process, alternating silver and gold and powder, and so it builds up multiple layers. And then when you blow it out, you get different levels of depth, and then the color. I guess one way to say it is I like letting the glass do what it wants to do. You sort of set it up. I always tell my students that in glass blowing, it's all in the setup. So you can't always tell the glass what to do. In fact, you'll be better glass blower if you can have a dialogue with the material, where you're talking to it and you're listening to it at the same time. And that's how you know when the glass is ready to move. Is it time to flare that? You need to get it hotter. The way you know that is by having a dialogue going on, which is partly what you see with your eyes, partly what you can feel in your fingers. You can kind of feel what the glass is doing in your fingers. How much is it wobbling at the end of the punty? Can't see my hand, but you can feel what the glass is doing, and you judge it by the color and all these things that become intuitive after a while.
And that's just really having that relationship over years and years of the glass, and just like you said, having the dialogue, getting in there and learning it.
Yeah. So you set the glass up. If you can set the glass up to do what you want, then it will cooperate with you. If you set things up, and it will do something interesting along the way that might surprise you. So that to me is the best kind of dialogue to have with the material. So you can set it up, and you set it up by how are you heating it? How are you creating the heat base to begin with? I was visiting, it was at the Boros School up in Seattle. And that was a great thing. That was very cool what they had there. There was a guy who was just starting out, and I was watching him, and he was heating a tube. He was getting ready to blow something. And he did this thing, which, if you're not a glass blower, you wouldn't think anything of it. But I immediately knew that, he was setting himself up to have a problem. He took the tube and just kind of waved it randomly through the flame a little bit, as we were talking before he got started. And I said to him, what you just did, you started setting up heat in that tube in an asymmetric, random way. And now, if you don't let that tube cool all the way before you start, if you continue heating that, it's going to be uneven. It's going to be heated unevenly. And when you go to blow it, it's going to blow out unevenly.
Yeah.
And to us as glass blowers, that's obvious. But to someone just starting out, it's like, what the hell are you talking about? So, kids these days, you can't tell them anything, right?
It's been that forever, right?
Yeah. It's always that way.
Yeah. Wow.
Goes around, comes around.
Yep.
So the point of that is that it's all in the setup, It's all in the setup. How you set up the heat base in your glass, Um, what order you do your steps in, that can make a real difference. The size of your flame, the conditions of your flame, all that stuff. You set those things up with some mindfulness, and then you're going to be more likely to have the results you want.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Um, what is your, now that there are colors out here in the Boro world, what is your favorite color to work with?
Oh man, I don't know. There's so many. I haven't even tried them all out.
Yeah,
There's too many. It's great. It's wonderful. There's so many. But the molten aura, the purple molten aura, that's like woo.
that
That's
royal
like
jelly.
That's the purple. I was waiting my whole career for. Right? They should send me some extra free now for having said that. So they can use that quote. But it's like mixing my own color. That was a color that I was always trying to get. In soft color, in like soda lime glass, there were purples like that available. Manganese, makes a great purple. At the higher temperatures of borosilicate, it's not stable. So and people tried purple for different kinds of purple, and there were some pretty nice ones out there. But that molten aura, the striking purple made with gold and starting with sand from scratch, they really got that dialed in. And of course, the colors aren't cheap. I don't tend to make solid colored pieces, with a lot of color in them. So the expense of the color doesn't bother me that much. And I know what it takes to create some of that stuff. So I don't mind that color, really. I mean, it's like I said, it's the color you always wanted.
I agree.
Obviously, there are other great colors too, but that's, that one really, to me, that's like means lampworking has arrived. Finally, the field has evolved enough that color is available. It should never not have been available, but obviously there were technical reasons why it wasn't.
It's crazy, throughout history, purple has always been that color that is almost unattainable.
Yeah. Well, partly it's made, that purple is made with gold, which is expensive,
Really expensive now.
Yeah. And people, traditionally would have better uses for their gold than putting into colored glass. But, yeah. And, I made some pretty good purples by combining, a striking copper ruby, that's copper and germanium, the main elements in that, compounds in that, with a cobalt blue. But it was laborious. What you do is you mix and I talk about this in my books. Maybe put a picture of the books right now. I talk about it in my books where you can combine red glass and blue glass, but it's tricky because if you mix them too much, then the cobalt, the blue glass, interferes with the striking of the red glass, so it doesn't strike like you want it to. So it's a matter of having a balance. So I would have to try a bunch of times and combine different batches together to get something that struck, the red would still strike, but you had that blue to the right shade where it gives you that real nice amethyst grape juice purple. But it was a process. Like I said, that's why I hate to throw away any little scraps of color, because I would sometimes have to go through that to come up with a color that I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Or a nice transparent orange that wouldn't get weird, wouldn't overstrike, wouldn't understrike, wouldn't go opaque. That's takes some practice.
It does. So, is there a color that you just absolutely don't want to use in Boro right now?
Oh. Well, I'm still kind of shy with the cadmium colors. I mean, I like them okay. The newer ones, they're great. I guess I sort of developed an aesthetic, that's more like these colors behind me where it's like, iridescent blending colors that contrast with each other in subtle ways. So the cadmium colors tend to be like, like crayons.
Right. Hard.
Great. Yeah. If you're looking for a certain look, sometimes they almost look more like ceramics.
Mm-hmm.
But that can be a good look. I mean, it's certainly, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not what I'm that attracted to. I'll tell you a color I don't like to use. Anything, it's sort of a class of colors I call evil green.
Okay.
Which is like chromium. And now even that, the color companies have gotten a lot better. There's a Chinese jade green. If you've ever used that stuff It's compatible with itself. I mean, I've used it for some Christmas ornaments, some like commissions we've gotten of Christmas ornaments. We do that from time to time, and you want some green, and that's cheap and it's easy to get. But apprentice of mine just was working on a tube, and he mixed some of that with some clear in order to make it like even more translucent, a section of it, and it cracked all to hell.
Right.
Yeah. Chromium, Henry Grimmett explained this years ago. He said chromium, when it's heated in the glass, it can actually, when it gets exposed a lot to the flame, chromium oxide will actually change its oxidation state enough to become incompatible with itself.
Oh, wow.
If you're not careful, if you work it a long time. So chromium, that kind of chromium green has always been problematic. You know, when I was mixing it myself from scratch, you know, you put a bunch of borax in there and don't make it too dense of a green and it can be all right, but it's always risky. I'm always sort of leery of any opaque green. You know, there are some out there that work fine, but it's like, which one is it?
Yeah.
Pick up a piece.
Wow. Well, that's nice to learn that too. Thank you. What is the most difficult piece you've ever attempted?
Oof.
I think they're all pretty difficult, especially your
Right?
kinetic pieces.
Yeah, the kinetic pieces, you know, they're tricky. They're challenging, but you know, the nice thing with borosilicate is a lot of times you can go back in and rework something that doesn't work. So the kinetic pieces often have a lot of experimentation, and I'll do some, you know, I'll work something out and then have to go back in and change it. So they're difficult in that sense, in that you just really have to be willing to persist and try different things and look at it from different angles. And literally, I did a lot of research into steam engines and stuff to figure out how those things worked. Difficult. Yeah, a real challenge was this piece. It was not even entirely glass, this big outdoor metal marble run that I made for a gallery in Sedona. They commissioned it for the outside of the building. It's the Melting Point Gallery in Sedona.
Okay.
And it's a giant marble machine. The marbles are about the size of a billiard ball, snooker ball, and it's 20 feet tall. And I had to learn some computer modeling because there was an existing structure on the building, a metal structure they wanted me to integrate the piece into. So I had to design the track to weave in between these elements in 3D. I spent a year or more just thinking of different ways to try and do it without computer modeling, and it just drove me nuts. So finally I had to learn some computer modeling, which was great. And then I worked with a fabricator, this guy Ryan out of Phoenix, who's very skilled to do the metal work on it. And he also helped me figure out some of the mechanical components because he's also knowledgeable in that. So that piece was pretty challenging. You know, it was the most expensive piece I ever did. In retrospect, probably should have been more expensive because these things always take longer than you think, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that was pretty challenging. You know, there was a lot to figure out.
Well, I mean, you had to learn computer graphics and whatnot, engineering, just to start that.
Yeah.
Just that could have been a bump that you know, the average person is just like, too hard. We'll move on.
Yeah. Well, of course, nowadays, you know, everyone's so digital native now. The next generation, it's kind of like, oh, I better learn it.
Yeah.
Kind of keep up with people, right?
Yeah.
I at this point, you know, like this marble machine I'm working on right now, I used the same software to develop the rough shape of it because I wanted to make sure that it would fit into my annealer, right? Mm. And the guy the client has a certain niche that it needs to fit into. So I had a design parameter, and I wanted to have these sort of blocky geometric elements. So I had to use the computer modeling, or it was easiest to use the computer modeling to figure out how those line up.
Wow.
But then I used that for the basic framework and the basic design of where the elements of it, like the elevators for the marbles, are going to go. And then after that, then I kind of freewheel it. So that I'm using the computer for the basic structure, but I don't want to let it determine everything. And in fact, when you make these things, one of the things I've learned, especially with the marble runs, is you can only plan so much because you get surprised. You're working on it, and some things like, oh, the marble doesn't really fit in that space that I thought was so clever in between these two other things on there. So a lot of times you're better off not planning too much and then just being willing to make all the adjustments you have to make as you go to make it work.
Wow, man,
The
what a
hardest
challenge.
thing, I think, with glass and maybe any art form is just to persist. You know, I was thinking of getting T-shirts printed that would just say "glass blowing sucks." You know, because I say that to my students sometimes. It's like when something happens. You know, you're working on a piece. You're working on a piece for 3 hours, and then it explodes, or it falls off the puntee on the way into the annealer, or whatever. You know, there's so many things that can go wrong. It's just glass blowing sucks.
Yeah, I like to tell all the guys starting out, you know, like, just so you know, you're either a little crazy and partly stupid, because glass blowing, it's difficult. You get in it and it's failure after failure after failure after failure, and it's crazy.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes it so powerful as kind of like, you know, for developing self-confidence. And, you know, they even use it therapeutically, right? There's programs using it for like veterans with PTSD. There's glass blowing programs for them. And
That's what we do.
yeah, there's a few places doing stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great, you know, and like the Hilltop program in Seattle using furnace glass blowing for, you know, underprivileged kids to help them do something that is like amazing. You know, there's forces out in the world telling kids, you know, even, you know, affluent white kids who seem very comfortable, there's forces telling them you can't do it. You know, you can't be creative. Just our world is full of forces that are negative against creativity.
Absolutely.
And glass, because there's a bit of a challenge to overcome, you know, it gives you a different kind of confidence and patience. I mean, I really attribute whatever I've learned about patience to glass, because sometimes you just have to be patient, you know, and you have to try it 100 times to make it work, and that's just the way it is. You can whine as much as you want, you can throw a tantrum, you can do all those things, but none of that changes the fact.
You got to get back in there and do it. And I feel that without glass blowing, there is no way I could be who I am today, because glass makes you humble. You think you're good, and then it's like, nah, step back, boy. And then you realize that that's just really life. Everybody's trying their best, and at some point you're gonna hit a bump, and that bump's gonna make that glass fall off or something. So you realize, like, it's okay, you fucked up. Let's just try it again.
Yeah, so I think glass is really a very spiritual medium.
Agreed.
It always strikes me as sort of weird when someone's an egotistical glassblower. It's like, I mean, great. It's good that there are a lot of people out there who are very good, even some people who are egotistical, and they're kind of justified in being egotistical because their skills are like just amazing, what they're doing. I mean, you know it. If you've ever worked glass and you see someone who's amazing, you know they're amazing. But it's kind of unfortunate if they kind of feel like they're amazing, you know? I think it's better for us all to stay humble.
Yeah.
And, and glass will teach us more. You know, because it's that dialogue. And if you're not humble, you may not be listening to what's next. I mean, it's kind of tempting to get good at one thing, and then because you're really good at that thing, you're known for that thing, and it's secure, and you know, people respect you for it. And that's fine as a business model, you know. I think there's also a level on which maybe you should be trying some things that you're not good at, or that are scary, or that do keep you humble, so that you know, you continue to grow.
Absolutely. Do you collaborate often with people?
I've done a few collabs, especially in the pipe world. I've collabed with a few people. You know, Mickelson and I have done a couple of collabs, so we could maybe insert some pictures of those here.
Yeah.
We did a marble machine a couple of years ago. We did a big marble machine for a show at Habitat Galleries that had, it wasn't a pipe show by any means. It was sort of a show inspired by urban street art was kind of the theme, the inspiration for a lot of the pieces. So we did a piece that had a lot of like sort of graffiti elements on it and some sort of kind of like neon element. And there was a marble machine, and then it had a pipe in there too,
All right.
that was kind of part of the environment of the piece. So that piece was called Rush Hour in the Promised Land.
Wow.
And it had UV elements in it too. So the marbles were like UV reactive. So that was kind of a cool piece. I think that's still at Habitat Galleries. I've done collabs with Bertoni and with Darby, and Ewok and I did a cool little thing. It was like a marble machine for dabs. So you make a little, make a little ball of the rosin, and you roll it down there, and there's a thing you pull out that pulls the rosin. It rolls down in, the little dab rolls down in there, and then you pull a lever, and the torch slides into place and heats it up. And he may even still have that piece. I don't know what happened with it. That was cool. So I've done collabs with a few people. I'm probably forgetting some of the people I've done collabs with. Let me see who else is on here. Nick and I did this. We did an engine, I actually, I
like a V8 motor engine or something.
Yeah, it's a model of a steam engine, so it has all the parts of a steam engine, but it's hooked up to a motor just to turn it for display purposes. And to really make it function on steam, you'd have to do some changes. But it has all the principle, and then the pipe itself is kind of disguised in two parts. So I did some of the pipes I've done. I call them clandestine pipes because the pipe itself is sort of hidden, sort of playing off the idea of it being a degenerate thing, right? You want to hide. So in this one, the pipe, there's a sort of a boiler on the side of the engine that that's actually it's a bubbler. So that's the bubbler part. You pull off a couple of O-rings and that comes out. And then the bowl is kind of sitting by itself on the top of the crankshaft or the beam going back and forth. So that comes out and you put it together and you've got a little hand bubbler. Nice. So that was a really cool collab. I did the glass work on it. I shipped it to him. He was in Texas at the time. I shipped it to him with these complicated instructions how to assemble it, because it was going to be in parts so he could electroform it, right? This is back when he was doing a lot of electroforming still. So he electroformed it, and then we met with the piece at one of the shows, and then we put it. Then I later did some additional work on it, added some more. So it went through a couple of stages. I added a bunch more, some beads and some feathers and stuff on there, and some gold leaf to kind of snazz it up even more. So it's a pretty trippy piece at this point.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun. So those are some of the collabs I did. I did a cool collab with Serto, one of his spray bottles.
Okay, yeah.
With like the spray, the water sort of spewing out there. And he really took that idea and ran with it, and has done a lot more with like sort of water happening. I mean, he was already doing some of that, but that kind of helped. I encouraged him or something to do more of that. So he's really done some cool stuff with that. A few collabs I've done, and it's fun. It can be a great way of working, and sometimes it's awkward. I've also got a list of people who want to do collabs with me that I haven't made it happen yet. Size Love and I did a collab too, where he sent me some tubing sections, and I made one of my bikes out of that.
Oh wow!
And that's in a collection up in Chicago now. But so collaboration's interesting. I kind of long distance collabs in some respects are a little easier, especially nowadays. You send stuff back and forth, like people were doing with some of the Japanese artists for a long time. Maybe I guess still are. Just sends pieces back and forth to put together into a finished thing.
Yeah.
So collabs are fun.
They are fun. What's the most amount of time you've ever spent on one particular piece. I'm going to assume it's that marble machine you made.
Yeah, the big one in Sedona.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's and the time, the most amount of time was in the design and sort of project management. I also had to learn all about project management to make that happen. I took an online course, on LinkedIn Learning about
Wow.
some British guy about how to do project management, how to make Gantt charts and stuff, because it was complicated. Even though there were really just two of us working on it, you had to coordinate a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We had to know what parts we needed, so I had to go through the Master Car website and figure out exactly what bearing do you need at the top and the bottom of this shaft, and what size is the shaft, and then the hex shaft that's going to hold the spirals that make things go, and different bearings and different motors. Which one is the right one? You got to do some calculations, figure out the motors and the metal, and you got to consult with the fabricator and figure out what his schedule is and what can he do and what has to get water jet cut and how long does that take, and all those those things, and rent the equipment. We had to rent a lift to put together. We were just doing some additional work on it. We did a little bit of refurb and added a bit to it last week. So I had to rent the lift again, and that was another $300 to get the lift in there.
Yep.
So it's complicated. You have to coordinate all this stuff. So I really learned a lot. I'm now kind of prepared to do something even more elaborate. But that was, hundreds of hours.
Wow.
Hundreds of hours, But the marble machines, like this one I'm working on now, it's going to be a couple hundred hours. I'm not keeping track at this point. It's going to be several hundred hours by the time it's done. There's always things that you think you have working right, and then after a while, maybe something shifts a little bit in the annealer, or you add another component, and so you have to go back and make adjustments. You think you've got it, and then after a while, it's very interesting, talking about a dialogue with a piece. I really find with the kinetic stuff that it starts talking to you after a while. Like, it will show me something. Like, it's weird. It's like it's a conscious thing. And it will show me. Like, the marble will fly off the track where it needs a guardrail at some point. And the chances of it happening when I'm looking at it are like 1 in 1,000. Because sometimes there's little things like I hand make the marbles and I hand make the track. And a little variation on the track interacts with a little variation on the marble at just the right angle, and it makes the marble fly off. And you can't always catch that. What I normally do when I'm with these motorized marble runs is I set them up. I have a security system that I use only for testing marble machines. So it's pointing at the marble machine, these cameras at different angles, right? And I let it run for 24 hours. And then I see if any marbles are on the floor. And then I go back and look at the tape and see, that's where the marble flew off, and I can see it flew off at that point. But without that, the chances of seeing the marble fly off are small. And it might be fine for a long time, but then the marble flies off. And I'd rather they don't fly off, right?
No doubt.
But sometimes, occasionally, it will show me something, either a marble flying off or some weird little thing that is not going to happen very often. But the thing goes, check this out, wait, don't go any further. Because a lot of times those little adjustments you have to make, especially with the marble machines, as you add, if you make the adjustment at the beginning, okay, it's not so hard to make. But if you wait until there's a bunch of other marble track all over and around it, getting in there with a hand torch and tweezers to make it go, forget it. It's too hard. I find as I get older, my hands are getting bigger too. It seems that way. They just get bigger. Yeah. I was fiddling with an old piece, one that Shelbo actually helped me on when he was doing that internship with me. I was in there reworking something on this old piece, and it's like, how did I get my hands in there? Like, I can't get my hands in there anymore. But anyway, it's easier to make adjustments early on. So sometimes the piece is very nice, and we'll say, check this out before you go any further.
So you might run them in your video system a couple times.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And pieces go through the annealer dozens of times, you know, by the time they're done, these complicated things.
Yeah. Yeah. Holy mackerels, that's neat. Um, well, I guess I gotta say, what can we look forward in the future from you?
Yeah, well, I'm working on this fancy marble machine. I don't have a title for it yet, but it's in sort of a brutalist style. Brutalism is like a style of art that an architecture that has sort of angular, blocky shapes in it, and sort of celebrates the process of making it. So you see, like a lot of times, brutalist buildings are made with poured concrete. So you really
Oh,
see where that wooden form was holding the concrete. You see the grain of the wood and rough parts of the concrete. So the guy who's commissioning this piece, he really wanted it to have that sort of brutalist quality to it. It's going to be just all clear, but it has these angular, blocky shapes, and it's going to have. I'm going to leave some of the scars on it. Like a lot of times when I'm making something, like I said, you have to make adjustments and move parts, and there'll be a little stub left from where you take it off and you move. I'm going to leave some of those stubs on there. I think he's going to like that, to give that texture rather than going back in and trying to make those disappear. They never completely disappear, and that I always consider it part of the piece. But I think I'm going to really let those be prominent.
wow.
So I'm working on that. So there'll be more kinetic stuff coming. I haven't made any steam engines in a while. I've been kind of itching to make one. I wanted to make one last year, and then I got a couple of commissions for marble machines that sort of interrupted that. So maybe I'll get to make another steam engine soon. I continue in my studio. I've got apprentices help me with some production stuff. We have gifty things we do. I don't do a lot of functional stuff. I have some that I've made, and from time to time I'll be doing more, I'm sure. But I've got a few pieces around, and some of them resurface from time to time. But kinetic stuff, that's really what I'm most passionate in. And then I have a Patreon page. So I put videos up there, some instructional videos for people who want to learn or just support art by subscribing to my Patreon.
Yeah, and I think everybody should go check that out in this glass game. Check out Dunham's Patriarch. Is it Patriarch?
Patreon.
Patreon.
Yeah, I'll give you the link, and you can put it in the
We'll put it up.
description or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of crazy stuff coming. You never know exactly what.
It's like glass. You're never quite sure, but you're just going to keep pushing.
It's a miracle. Every day's a miracle.
It really is, and magical. And
Yeah.
so, do you find that you still have the same passion for glass today as you did when you first started? More or less, same?
It's different, I mean, it's sort of like comparing apples and oranges, because the passion matures over time. So at first you're just really excited, and you're kind of a blank slate. You're a sponge, and it's kind of unscripted where things are going to go. Like, the apprentice I have right now, he's like 17. He's been doing glass for a couple of years, and when he connects with a new thing that he wants to try out, that he's really interested in, he's kind of on the edge of his seat, and he's doing it, and that passion, that real youthful passion, is great. And I still get some of that from time to time for myself, but also there's a different kind of passion that comes from persisting with something over time that you build. It's like any relationship, like with a person or something. You build something over time. So there's a subtlety that develops, and an appreciation for, there's a quote I read somewhere recently. They said, beautiful young people are an accident of nature. Beautiful old people are works of art.
I like
and
it.
What I mean by that, if you've ever seen some of these photographs that people take sometimes of really, really old people, the photographs, and you look at that, it's like, they don't have a Hollywood beautiful face, but there's something there that's just amazing in someone who's lived that long and what they've seen. So the relationship with glass kind of develops over time that same way. So I really appreciate, like I was saying, I appreciate glass that has texture to it, and a roughness isn't just like perfect and symmetrical, because to me that shows a little bit more of the richness of life. which is not that I have anything against what's perfect and symmetrical. I mean, people who are doing like someone like Kiva Ford. Oh my God, shoot me now. I mean, you see something Kiva Ford does, it's like you just want to quit, right? Because the guy's just so amazing.
Right.
So that's awesome too. But there's another kind of richness from, I think, glass that shows the texture, and then a relationship with glass where you're getting into the possibilities that are sometimes overlooked. Which is one of the things I like about kinetic glass, is it's been sort of overlooked. And the thing I also really like about the kinetic glass is that it freaks people out.
Right. You think it's going to break or something, and how's it working?
Yeah. So like pipes, the thing with pipes is they're all about an altered state of consciousness. I mean, the use of pipes and even the aesthetics surrounding them of the pipes themselves is about altered states of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I like a piece to put someone into an altered state of consciousness, whether they're going to smoke out of it or not.
Yeah.
So the kinetic glass, really, to me, I see it doing that for people.
Yeah.
It alters their consciousness.
I agree.
And I think that's art's job, really, is to alter people's consciousness. One of art's jobs is to alter people's consciousness.
Yeah.
Hopefully for the better.
Well, yeah, if we go the other way, man, that's not good. So I think we're doing that as an overall.
I think so, too. Like I said, I'm just so amazed and proud of what people have done. I mean, I helped provide some information. People have told me that means I have some ownership of the pipe movement and stuff. And I've always been sort of an honorary pipe maker, because even when I wasn't making pipes, because of the books and stuff.
Yep.
But I'm honored to be in the position I'm in, but it's really what people have done, what all the other people have done with the information and taken it just to such new heights. It's just amazing and awe-inspiring to me. It's
the old saying almost, teamwork makes the dream work, and all the glass blowers just becoming a team, sharing. The dream is just phenomenal. Yeah. I'm very humbled by it. Be part of that. Would you like to add anything else?
No, we covered a lot of ground,
Make sure to check out your Patreon page.
Yes. Check out my Patreon. There's a lot of great information there. It's not too expensive to sign up on the basic level. There's even some free stuff you can check out. If you don't have my books, you should get my books.
I agree with that 100%. Even with YouTube and Google and all that shit, there are some, to be honest, I have your book sitting right on the corner of my station. 18 years later, it's still there today. I was just looking at it, I think like 2 days ago, there was something in it. And it's just, I truly believe every glass blower in this probably should have one of your books there. They will find a good use for it.
Yeah, it's the nature of books that they reveal things over time. You think you see something, and then you look at it a year later. It's not anything super special that I did. It's just the nature of books, is that you go back to it, and there's something you didn't see before, or something that now, given the context of your current experience level, it means something different.
Yes.
Glazed over. So, yeah, books are great.
Well,
anyway.
Yeah. Well, Bandhu, it was a complete honor to have you here, man. Again, you've made such you rock my world, man. So
thanks.
It's a pure honor.
You guys rock my world too. It's an amazing. I never would have predicted all this when I was starting out, so it's awesome.
Hell yeah. Well, make sure you check out Bandhu's stuff, and we'll see you later, man.
Okay.
Whoa, if your mind wasn't blown away by this amazing view with Bandhu Dunham, I don't know what to tell you, man. It was an honor to get to hang out with this guy. Holy mackerels, it's so crazy how much work he's put into this to make our lives just that much more easier. I want to throw something out there. Please check out our Elevate Veterans. It's our 501c3. And we did mention how glass can help out with your mental state. It helps you get through some battles because you're going to be fighting these battles in glass, and you're going to get slapped in the face. So we have this really cool thing, Elevate Veterans, to help rehabilitate and reacclimate veterans into society. Check it out. We can use some support. And if you really want to support us as well and you're not a vet, check out our Elevate Dolls brand ambassador program. It's super awesome. It's super great things for you to earn, super great ways for you to put smiles on other people's faces, and that's what I love about it. So check you out later. Y'all have a good one. Elevate mind, body, spirit, y'all.